Welcome to Rooted Intentionally. I'm Susan Carson, and it's my passion to create safe space for transformational encounters through listening, healing prayer, and spiritual practices. And in this podcast, we bring you interviews and spiritual practices designed to help you live more deeply rooted in the love of God for you, wherever you are in your life right now. And today I get the joy of bringing you a conversation with my new friend, Steve Stewart. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Susan. It's good to be with you today.
Thank you. We are new friends thanks to our shared friend, Steve Sjogren. So let's just give Steve a little shout out.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah, we both know him from the Vineyard days. Different parts of the world, and yet our paths have merged through Steve's introduction. So, and we have some other friends in common, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit as we progress. So, Steve, you are a pastor, church planner, author, podcaster, and director, founder and director of Impact Nations, which is an amazing organization that I'm just learning about, and I'm sure we'll talk more about today. But I just want to read this to give people the big picture as we get started. Impact Nations partners with leaders in the developing world to rescue lives and transform communities by engaging people in practical and supernatural expressions of the kingdom of God. And that is beautiful. You're a husband and a dad and many things. And we're just glad to have you with us today.
Thank
you. So one of the questions.
So the grandfather of 14 grandchildren.
14. Whoa. That's beautiful. So how many kids?
I have 4 sons who went forth and multiplied. And they live in various parts of North America. So we have to get on airplanes. One of them, my eldest son, Tim, is now the CEO of Impact Nations. He really runs the organization. And he lives in town here. But for others, I've got to fly to Tennessee or Pennsylvania or Canada to see my grandchildren.
People really are spread out.
They are.
Yeah. Yes. Well, travel has been challenging these last few years, and maybe that brings me to my first question. I often ask guests who join us because in this space, we're all about living more deeply rooted in the love of God. So I wonder, in these times that we're living in that have seem more and more challenging in some ways, what has been helping you live more deeply rooted in God's love?
Well, that's a great question. I would have to say that over these past couple of years, probably about 3 years, really, we've been in what's been called a perfect storm. Socio-political crisis, racial crisis, economic now, and that sneaky thing called COVID.
Yeah.
For me, I think a big part is I've held to, for a long time, a relatively patterned approach to the beginning of my day, and in terms of contemplation and reading and prayer and so forth, and I've maintained that steadfastly through this tumultuous time, and in fact I've really increased it, and we can talk later, as the last 10-12 years has really been a deeper journey for me. And so that's how that's in terms of inputting. And another way is outputting. I had the privilege of being able to communicate through podcasts, through our website, through writing books, etc. And so I'm able to, in expressing what's going on in a way that hopefully connects with people, it even helps me to process what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, writing is very helpful for me for that as well. And also pizza. Pizza and chocolate helps sometimes.
So I won't argue.
So when we first met, we talked about, I've been doing a series on healing our image of God, and I've gotten to interview some friends we have in common, including Bradley Jersak and Brian Zhand. And part of that has been just the sharing of stories and how our images of God have been formed and how they've changed, how that's changed over the course of our lives. So I'd love to hear a little bit of your story of how your image of God was formed, maybe early in life, what was brought to you maybe through your family or the church, or yeah, and sort of where that started for you.
Okay. Well, of course, our image of God, positively or negatively, is always formed through our earliest days of childhood. I did not grow up in a church-going family for most of the years that I was at home. I didn't grow up in a family where we ever talked about God. And yet, of course, my image was somewhat being formed. It's interesting. People tend to think of me as an extrovert because of what I've done with my life. But I think at the core, there's also a pretty strong introverted side. By that, I mean, I have, since a little kid, I've just got stability and focus and emotional health by being alone, going for long walks in the forest, which I grew up in the 50s, and it was still safe to let your little kid out the door and he'd come back when he was hungry. So I would tend to do a lot of my time just alone. And as I look back, I realized that the Lord was forming me, and I was gradually getting a sense of his presence, but I could not possibly have put words to that. For me, it was when I was 23, married, working, going to university, and actually in a pretty tumultuous time in my life, that I encountered Christ in my bedroom. And I didn't know any Christians. I didn't know I should go to church then. I didn't even know enough to say I'm a Christian. I just knew Jesus was real. Some months after that, through a chance encounter in a university cafeteria, I almost on a dare, I went to a church in our city, Vancouver, and I walked in, and I had no idea that it was very much at the center of the whole Jesus People movement. And Steve Stewart and I have that heritage, that Jesus People movement in common. And I went in, and I'd never been to any place like it. And I was stuck because we had a central aisle and pews right to the windows, and I'd accidentally got there early, so I was stuck against the window. And you know, it was 49% terrifying because it was very charismatic. And of course, I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what anything was. And yet 51%, there was this deep sense that I never have forgotten. It was, I'm finally home. Wow. It wasn't that church building. It was, of course, coming into the family of God, but I wouldn't have even known that. All I knew was, oh, I'm home. So I was there for 10 years, ended up on staff, started a couple of Christian schools for them.
Mm.
And my image of God was being formed by a pretty strong Calvinist,
Mm.
very strong Calvinist, kind of a funny Calvinist charismatic thing, but as time went on, it was less and less charismatic and more and more Calvinist. And then after about 10 years of that, and starting those schools and so forth, the Lord spoke to me really just sovereignly, which has been his pattern. It's not like I hear from him a lot, but when he breaks in, boy, things change. And he said, I want you to move east. I was the west coast. I want you to do it now and plant churches. Well, I never planted a church, never planted a geranium. And so we, sold the house, sold the car, sold much of the furniture. We packed up and we went. It was really scary, but got a job and just started gathering in the living room. And then after 2 years, I couldn't keep doing my job, which was in business. I was working for the second biggest computer company in the world, which was ironic. I'd never turned a computer on before they hired me. And but this church that we planted, which was a vineyard, that's how Steve and I got connected. It just grew and grew, and eventually we planted out several other churches around Ontario. Planted a church in Russia. I was thinking about it this morning because of all that's going on right now. How I took a team in there without knowing what I was doing, but we had 2 busloads of food and clothes went into St. Petersburg the very week the Soviet Union was dissolved. And then out of that, eventually planted a church there. So things were going really well, really well. And the thing that has historically been now called the Toronto Blessing broke out with my friend John Arnott 35 minutes down the road. And then it broke out at our church, and people started coming from around the US and then Europe, and Time magazine phoning and on and on and on. And we didn't know what on earth was going on. It's just the power of God came, and people kept falling down. And Christina and I, my wife, would get home about 3:30 in the morning. Well, we were in the midst of this for about a year and a half. And in the midst of all that we did, because it became clear after a short time that I'm not called to a kind of a revival renewal movement for that to be the focus. I thoroughly enjoy it, but my calling was different. So I was delighted to watch what the Lord did with John and how he carried that so wonderfully. John and Carol, I've known them forever, and great admiration for how they carried all that. But in the midst of that atmosphere, a year and a bit later, and churches being planted and all this stuff, the Lord spoke to me again. And he spoke to me through our spiritual parents. I don't know if you remember Dr. John White and his wife, Lori. They wrote a lot of books. He traveled with Wimber anyway. And he started speaking to me through different people who didn't know what the Whites had said. And it was do it again. So we sold our house, we sold our car, and we moved 3,000 miles to the West Coast, to the least churched city in all of North America. And we planted a vineyard church there, and God blessed it. I mean, I never understood it. He blessed it. Now, let me take a little detour. The first time I ever went to Cincinnati was just before we started Sunday mornings, when I was up in Ontario, in a city called Cambridge. And I heard about Steve, and I went down for the weekend and spent a weekend with him. And we just clicked, and we've been dear friends ever since. But it was incredibly formative. And so from that time on, any church that we did, I wouldn't let us meet on Sundays until we were taking care of the poor. And so we did that. And so I think that's some of just God's favor, most of it I've never figured out, but the gospel, we're meant to do the gospel and not talk about it and think about it. It's following Jesus. He was on the move. And if we're going to follow him, we need to move. And this is, I'll get back to the little biography here, but this has marked what I've done all these years. Anyway, planted a church, grew there. And then again, the Lord just spoke to me one time when I was out alone. So we ended up planting a smaller church right in the core of the city we were in, and something called the Vancouver House of Prayer, and which I was drawing from the early days of Mike Bickle's model, because Mike and I go back. And then we started something called the Healing Rooms in Vancouver. A guy named Cal Pierce had started them in Spokane less than a year earlier. And I heard about it. I went and saw him. And so we started one in Vancouver, and to our amazement, it just multiplied and went across the country. So that's the background. And it's now going to be 19 years ago this year. I was flying back from Seoul, Korea. I've been doing some conferences for Christian businessmen and pastors. And while I was just sitting on the airplane, not praying, probably reading a magazine, again, the presence of the Lord came around. Now, it sounds like it happens to me every week. It's like 4 times in 40 years, but each of these was markers. And he said to me very clearly, he said, "What do you want to do with the rest of your life? I'll let you do anything." Well, I had presumed I would just be a church planter and pastor for the rest of my days. I was 50 at that point. And I said, "Anything?" And I said, "If I can do anything, then with the rest of my life, I want to rescue lives. I want to rescue them spiritually, but educationally, economically, medically. That's what I want to do." Nobody but my wife knew about that. But within weeks, my phone started ringing, people I didn't know, emails, etc. Started going there, people saying, "Can I come with you?" And it became Impact Nations. And I got to where I couldn't pastor anymore. I always laughed because I had yet another time of being away. Like, I held the two in combination for about 3 or 4 years, but I was just gone more and more. And I came back from yet again being away 6 or 7 weeks somewhere in the world. And there was a new welcome team, and they invited me to sign the guest book, and I was their pastor. So I thought, I think it's time. So I stepped down from that. So we've been doing Impact Nations. Really, it started about 2005, I would say. But it evolved. But by 2005, there was something going on that we could identify. So we work. Shall I keep this monologue going?
Sure, you're doing great.
Impact Nations, we work around the developing world. I think we've worked in all told, I don't know, 23, 24 nations. At any given time, maybe 6, 7, 8 nations we're working with. It comes out of what you read at the beginning. I have a deep conviction that the gospel is a lot bigger than we think it is. And we'll get to that later when we talk about the beautiful gospel. But and I believe the gospel touches every part of life. So that when we go into remote villages and we try to stay off the beaten track, and blind eyes open and deaf ears open and people come to Christ, that's the kingdom. But just as equally, it's the kingdom when we get clean water to a family or a community, actually, or we feed the hungry or get mosquito nets. It's all, Jesus said, good news to the poor, right? And as a friend of mine, David Roos, says, if it's not good news to the poor, then it's not good news. So we're really involved with that. And we take people on these trips called Journeys of Compassion, where everybody's on the front line. Maybe 2,000 times now people have signed up to come with us. And everybody heals the sick, everybody leads people to Jesus, and everybody works in some function in one of our mobile medical clinics, or in our feeding or clean water, or whatever it may be. So we do journeys, and they open doors to regions for us. And so they often, not always, but often lead to connections with leaders, whereby we can do ongoing community transformation and sustainable change. So really, we've been extremely busy, especially since COVID, with relief after disasters. I was just writing, that's why I was almost late coming in here. I was writing a report of this past year with floods, with the Haiti earthquake, so that we get in with food and build shelters and stuff. So relief work in lots of countries. We do really rescue and restoration. So we'll rescue people, especially women and kids, out of prostitution, out of prison. We've got thousands out of prison, out of ghettos, come to Christ, get them in safe, healthy living conditions. And then we begin to teach them business skills and life skills. And then we'll get to the place where we'll give them startup loans, and they'll start a business, and we'll say, you've been rescued. We now ask you to rescue others. And so there's been thousands of businesses started, and a lot of training. And then on top of that, I work with leaders and pastors in different countries and in North America, just encouraging and equipping and so forth. So like since COVID started, since March 20th, not quite 2 years ago, we've managed to distribute to starving people, because of course with COVID, most of the world are day laborers. And if everything shuts down, there's no food. So we managed to distribute a little over 2.6 million meals. I think we've gotten clean water, permanent clean water. I don't mean handing them a water bottle. It's a filter just and so forth. I think, I don't know, 600,000. So it amazes me that what has happened, and thousands with businesses, because on a plane, I said, Lord, I'd love to rescue lives. Isn't he wonderful? Isn't he amazing?
Okay.
Beyond all we could ask or even imagine. I read somewhere in a book.
Yes.
So that's what we do.
It's so beautiful. And I love that it's so sustainable in terms of how you're building into lives and communities. You're not just taking people and showing up and doing a project and leaving. You're connecting in a way that's sustaining.
We're in the middle of a program in a refugee camp in Uganda, 130,000 refugees. And we fed because they were desperate and starving. And so many came to Christ, and now there's house churches planted and everything. But we have connected with other partners, because that's a lot of what we do is networking, so that now we're teaching them how to build these incredibly high nutrition gardens, so that feeding their families, and that's already happening, but as it grows, they'll be able to take that to market, because there's a town about 30 minutes away, gain income. That's a project that we've been doing for a while, but I just found out about a big expansion on Friday afternoon that I didn't know. Can't keep up with all of it. So that's an example, because I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
And we've been able to get some great things done. Susan, I love northern India, and at some point get me to tell you about church planting and just the incredible move of God there. But in the midst of all that, we got into a brick factory where multi-generations work as slaves there. And 2 years ago, God just did an amazing thing, and people can read about it on our website. But bottom line is, we were able to meet with the factory owner and say, would you let these children go to school if we pay for all the costs? And he said, it was about $130 a kid. And he said, sure, but nobody's going to want to do that. Well, we're now 1,400 kids out of slavery, in school, being fed every day. I think that's good news to the poor.
That's such good news.
Those are just a couple of things.
Wow. It is such a beautiful gospel. And I'm still, I guess maybe because my early formative years were at least a little bit like yours in terms of growing up in a sort of a non-spiritual home, and then encountering Jesus and initially being formed in what was a very Calvinistic church environment. So I'm pondering the difference between the gospel as you would have understood it then and this more beautiful gospel as you understand it now. And I'd love to hear more about how that's sort of expanded for you.
Oh my word. Where do I start? I don't want to just take pot shots at my first 10 years, but
Sure.
when I look back on what was taught, the books that were promoted, there was a book about basically the poor are lazy and they get what they deserve, which, by the way, I'm very sad to say that's the predominant view according to various polls that have been taken. That's the predominant view among Christians in America.
Wow.
Most believe that the poor are getting what they deserve.
Wow.
Statistically, evangelicals are the least likely to give money to a homeless person.
Wow.
The world is much more likely to. So the Calvinist stuff really seeped into the foundation, didn't it? When I discovered that the gospel really is wonderful and transformative and inclusive, that's another big part of this transition for me. I really have embraced many years ago an inclusive gospel. Things I like to teach on is when Jesus said, follow me, who are we following? Well, we're following the seeking king who always went out to seek and to save that which was lost, right? Luke 19. We're following the inviting king who everywhere says, of course you're included. You come too, you come too. And we followed the serving king. Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. Well, when I got a hold of that and let it, and it continues to work in my heart, it pretty immediately started to move me on a different path of how I understood the gospel, hopefully how I live the gospel, very imperfectly, but I am about welcome, the gift of welcome, Jean Vanier called it. The inclusive gospel that says, of course you come to. And I think deep down, everyone's made for the kingdom. They just don't know it. And when we can demonstrate, this is something Steve used to teach us all, that the cornerstone of the gospel is to demonstrate the love of God, not talk about it. If teaching and talk would do it, it would have been done centuries ago, right?
Yes.
So the gospel has become bigger and broader and more inclusive. I spend time very purposely with Catholics and Orthodox and mainline and Anglican Presbyterians, and those are ones that just come to my mind because that's from the last couple of weeks.
Mhm.
The river of God, I say on my podcast at different times, I'll say, don't forget, folks, the river of God is very wide and very deep.
Mhm.
And we have tended to think that whatever stream we are in is the river of God. When Paul said to the Corinthians, you know, the eye can't say to the foot, I don't need you. We all need one another. Well, I always read that and pictured the church congregation that I gathered in. Yeah, Harry really needs Fred, who really needs Mary. He was talking to the church. So in my teaching and in my writing, increasingly, I would say the last 8 or 9 years, I purposely am drawing from a wide range of these streams, purposely, both in terms of church traditions, you know, as I just gave you a few examples, but also church history. So that's really affected the way I preach the gospel. When COVID's over, I'm sure I'll be back out again in villages and telling them about Jesus. Sometimes they've never heard his name, Susan. Sometimes we've had, when I have the team then go out to pray for them, on more than one occasion, a team member has come back laughing and said, someone said, so who's this Jesus fellow he was talking about? Which one of you is this Jesus fellow he was talking about, rather? And the gospel that I present is, it is this invitation, this inclusive. And when Jesus said it is finished, he said it is finished. I don't believe the gospel is transactional, Susan. And I think that if we both come from a Reformed background, we were presented with a view that I think is starting to lose its hold, but it was a very transactional view. If you'll do this, Jesus will do that. If you don't do this, he won't do that, you know. And I don't believe that. That's not good news. And so the good news is he's already done it. It's already there. And we can just start to live in the good of that. And so that's a long rambling answer. Have I gone and touched on your question?
Yes, it's beautiful. Yeah, because as I was listening, my next question was going to be, so what does that sound like when you share the good news with someone who's never heard of Jesus? What do you tell them?
Yeah, we talk about that a lot. I have a group of men and women that I've really mentored to do what I do better than I do it. And we talk a lot about what is our gospel. And so it does look like that. For a long time, Brad used to get excited about this, which surprised me, but he's that my gospel's really, to some significant degree, built around John 10:10, where I am not denying brokenness and conflict and poverty and those things, but I'm saying that's the thief who comes. He hates you, he comes to steal, but Jesus has already come for abundant life. I'll say, who's had enough of the thief? You know, before I get very far into that, I've got people nodding their heads like crazy, whether it's Burundi or whether it's India, whether it's Nepal or whether it's the Philippines, they all understand that. And I say, and today we can just turn our back on the thief and turn to Jesus, because he's already done it. And to me, that's really good news. So even when I lead people in a prayer, it's a prayer of thanksgiving. It's a prayer of, wow, Lord, I didn't realize what you did, that you defeated all that stuff. You already defeated it. Oh, thank you. That's a different way than I used to present you and I all know it. That it was like all of the sin that you ever did was poured onto Jesus, and the Father couldn't even look at him. Well, I absolutely do not believe that, and I haven't for a lot of years. Brad and I talk a lot about that, and Brian and I some too. And They're on our podcast. Tomorrow I have Brian, and the next day I have Brad.
Do you?
But
Oh,
yeah, but
fun.
those are recorded. We pre-recorded because I'm taking my wife away for 2 weeks vacation.
Oh,
Whether
lovely.
she wants to go or not, but I think she wants to
I'm
go.
sure she does.
Uh,
I love that. I love
and
that.
it's also, I've been able to preach in Sikh temples.
Hmm.
I've been able to preach mosque. I've been able to see people. It's like they suddenly understand I don't have to choose religions. This is nothing about that. This is about Jesus. In fact, I really love when folks come to Christ. We've seen tens of thousands of Sikhs in the last 8 or 9 years. I love when they don't take off the turban and don't shave their beard. I've got a dear, dear friend, a Muslim, who is a passionate follower of Jesus, an incredible evangelist, but he's a Muslim follower of Jesus.
Ah, I love that.
And so all of this beautiful gospel is helping to free me for a lot of years now from the confusion of what is cultural, what is Western world, the confusion of confusing that with being a disciple of Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that kind of good news, all I know is people, something I've probably, it's not like huge, but I've probably seen, I'm going to guess 3,000 Muslims come to Christ. And it's usually because I've just prayed and they've been healed, or their daughter's been healed, or whatever. And I'll say that is a gift from Jesus, because he loves you so much. Already given you another gift, him living with you on the inside forever. Is that something you just really want? Well, about 3,000 times I've said yes. I have had 6 times someone say, "Oh, that's lovely, but I'm a Muslim." 6 polite no thank yous.
Wow.
And I've never once, there's not a single sentence, have I compared the Quran and the Bible or Jesus and Muhammad, because that's not the point. The point is a beautiful, wonderful Jesus.
Yes.
There we go.
Yes.
Jesus close to preaching there, didn't I?
Oh, I love it. I love all of it. It's so good. It's the good news that, I never really felt in the models of evangelism I was taught early on, that it was good news, which is kind of why I never wanted to share it, which is one of the beautiful things that Steve Sjogren gave us as a church with servant evangelism, right? You just get to demonstrate the love of God to people.
And one of his life verses, Romans 2:4, it is the kindness of God that leads us to repentance.
Yes. Yeah.
I thought that it was really interesting, because I don't think we even knew of each other. And within 2 days, Steve talked to me about you. And then the next thing I know, I'm talking to Brad. And he's saying, "How do you know her?" Well, I don't yet, but I'm going to. And then I find out Brian. It's just interesting how it's all kind of weaving together, isn't it?
It's very interesting. God is up to something.
I think so.
Well, I'd love to maybe bring it back down, because I would love to spend like probably hours hearing stories just from you, but to bring it back to sort of your own personal journey and how this good news, right? This more beautiful gospel is forming and shaping you, and spiritual practices and things that have been helpful, meaningful to you in this process in your own life.
Okay, that's great. Well, before I get to my own spiritual practices, which are probably not much different from lots of other people, but I had way back in 1999, whatever that is. Whoa, that's 23 years ago.
We don't have to count. It's all right.
Well, in 1999, when I was 4 years old, no,
Exactly.
in the midst of, let's call it ministry success, all the churches and all the stuff going on, I really felt the Lord sabbatical. But I went away and I went off into the country and I just sought the Lord. I walked and walked and walked for miles and miles every day, day after day. And I sought the Lord. And what happened was the beginning of a shift in my life. That, of course, we taught he's our father, he's our papa, the Father loves you. I mean, we all taught that and believed it, and read books about it. But that journey from the head to the heart began then. And it came with a lot of breaking. I went through 2 years that were the worst wilderness of my life, without a doubt. And but I came out the other side where my identity, my core identity, was in the process of being changed from not doing things for a God that I loved very much, but to just, the greatest gift was just him and being with him. And that was a shift that started way back then. And then probably about maybe 12 years ago, I started to pursue what Paul calls the unsearchable riches in Ephesians. I started to pursue the mystery of Christ. In being charismatic evangelical, but an evangelical, I'd never heard teaching, nor had I ever taught on mystery, which is ironic. 28 times the New Testament talks about mystery. But it began a journey of the mystery of Christ. And it affected what I read. It affected how I prayed. It affected how I read the Bible. The podcast that I have, it's a weekly podcast. And for the last 43 weeks, I've been in Matthew's gospel. I think I mentioned that to you in a phone call.
Yeah.
One of the reasons is I want people to understand the gospel a lot better. But the other reason is that it becomes a vehicle for leading us into the deeper places of Christ. It begins to take us from, I know I'm painting with a broad brush, but many of us in the evangelical tradition have been presented with the Bible as propositional truth. This is true, this is false. If you do this, God will do that. Likewise, we have stopped at the literal reading of any verse.
Yeah.
One of the church fathers, Origen, said, if you don't understand multiple levels of meaning for any verse, you don't yet know that verse. So I've been using this podcast to, among other things, lead us into a deeper, more contemplative, slower reading of scripture. And that's been quite a journey for me, because I'm a classic type A, moving, get her done, you know.
Yeah.
This journey has affected my writing. I would definitely say the last book I wrote is the most contemplative. It's not the most contemplative that I would ever write, but in terms of what I wrote it for, it was called The Beatitudes for a Time of Crisis, because I think we're in this very existential time of crisis. But in writing it, that started to just come out. Again, mystery of Christ stuff again and again. So in terms of my spiritual practices, as I say, they're probably not very unique. I was just talking about them with my own spiritual director. I don't remember, 10 days ago, maybe, that for years now, I tend to, while my coffee is brewing, I tend to start with just getting quiet. Then I read a little bit from a contemplative. I just finished Julian of Norwich for the third, fourth time on Saturday. And today I'm reading a book of contemplative writing by Dorothy Day, the founder of the Catholic Workers. And she's been a justice hero of mine for years, but she wrote this wonderful book, contemplative book. So there's that, or I'll read Thomas Merton, or I'll read Teresa of Avila, or on and on. But I don't go a long time, probably 10 minutes. And then I get quiet. I kind of do what I do to just I have stilled and quieted my soul like a weaned child, David said in 131, didn't he? And then from there, I usually will read the scripture, and my directors challenge me, because I've read through the Bible every year for 40 some odd years, and he said, why don't you just read through half of the Bible this year, and every other month just park in one psalm or one passage. That's what I'm doing right now. And of course, the Lord takes me deeper.
Yeah.
Now I've got intercessory prayer. I got prayer for my family and all those grandkids. I've got prayer for all the partners and issues around the world, but that's very separate from my more contemplative prayer. So what I'm describing is probably not very unique from probably lots of your guests, but I know that I need it. And I alluded to it at the beginning. By and large, my time of being alone with Jesus is getting longer, not shorter, over the last couple of years, and in the midst of a very busy season. But it's like I really, really, really that. Gandhi famously said, "Oh, I have a very busy day today. I better spend extra time in prayer."
Yeah. Yes.
So
Yes.
that's in broad strokes. That's in broad strokes what I do.
That's really helpful. I think it's really particularly helpful for people to hear things like, well, I do that for 10 minutes, or, it becomes much more accessible for people, I think.
Yes. I every now and then, like most of us, I'll find a time where just the presence of the Lord is really strong. I like centering prayer, Thomas Keaton.
Yeah.
But and so every now and then I'll look and, wow, I've been 30 minutes here.
Where'd the time go? Yeah.
But that's not the norm. I'm not trying to go for 30 minutes or anything. I'm just trying to still myself. I have a few, I'll give you a couple little practical things. Is that what you need?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay. And before we're done, I want to talk about you coming to our event, because I'm very excited about that.
I'm very excited about that too.
I have some incredibly simple things, and there may be a combination. I like some of Richard Rohr very much, who lives in our town. I get to spend some time with him. And I love Merton, and on and on. But out of all of these things in my own journey, sometimes I will simply pray. That wonderful verse that lots of choruses were written about, "I, my beloved's, and he is mine. Banner over me is love." I often will start just quietly turning my heart to Jesus, and, Jesus, I belong to you, and you belong to me. Jesus, I'm yours. and you're mine. I'm yours, and you are mine. And very, very often, many times a week, it could be in my kind of private time with the Lord, or it could be when I'm driving or walking, just in the rhythm of my breathing. I'm in you, and you're in me. And I'm in you, and you're in me. And I'm in you, and you're in me. And then that usually leads me into a place of real quiet. And then just the presence of the Lord. One of the things I learned from reading Richard Rohr is those many, many, many times where my thoughts come in. Rather than fighting them, I always picture myself, it always seems to be the very same river. I picture myself on the banks of the river, and these things, I just let them float by till the river's empty again. Oh, Lord, I'm in you and you're in me. Another thing that I often do is the Jesus prayer, and I may find myself some days just saying that lots of times through the day. But in my contemplative time with the Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I think that's some of the overflow of being impacted by the Eastern Orthodox tradition over the last 10 years.
Yes.
And those will be the means for me to just calm down. I can now, or at the end, I can give you one that I also like to use.
Yeah.
Do you want to do that now?
Sure. We don't have to, we
Doesn't
can do
matter
this
what?
however we want. So,
All right. Well, I love this. And actually,
Yeah.
I'll even, when I'm preaching at a church or something, I'll sometimes surprise them by finishing with this rather than call. Although I'm nothing against altar calls. But Psalm 46:10, be still and know that I am God. Let me just take you through the very, very, very simple way, but how much this helps me.
Oh, I love that.
Especially at the beginning when I'm just sitting down and I'm just kind of trying to get centered. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be. And for me, that's a very simple entering in practice. So as you can see, none of them are very complicated.
Yeah.
I try to, those are the most important ones. I'm going to stop there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love that because I felt, and I trust that others who are tracking along with us just feel it only takes a few moments, right, for things inside to begin to center and quiet and shift.
Yep.
And you move into a very different space at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really try to, when I find myself kind of, giving a little guidance or something, typically the younger men who are still at the stage of their lives where their careers are really important. I mean, godly men with godly careers, but that outward focus, I try to encourage them. You need to just be still
Mhm.
I like to talk about sacred space. I mean, that's
Yeah.
one of the things. In a moment we'll talk about this conference, but it's one of
Yes.
the things that one of the reasons we're coming together is for sacred space. On Wednesday nights, we open up our house.
Mm.
We always start with eating together. I learned that 22 years ago.
Yeah.
A guy named Wolfgang Simpson. He said, if you'll start in the kitchen at 6 instead of in the living room at 7:30, you'll discover family instead of meeting. And that simple little
Ooh,
thing has made all the difference in the world.
that's good.
And so we have family, and it just keeps growing because, again, this inviting, seeking Christ that we follow, I just open it
Mm.
up. Anybody can come. And week by week, more people come. And when they come, part of what we're doing is, I maybe am playing a little guitar or somebody else and just kind of the atmosphere of it all, but we're creating sacred space.
Yeah.
Silence isn't scary, isn't bad.
Yeah.
It's intimacy.
Mm. So good. It's so good. Well, I'd love for you to share more about this conference that's coming up that I get
Yes.
that I get to be a part of.
You are doing one of our workshops.
I'm so excited.
Yeah. They were going to have me do one. We were going to call it Kingdom Parking and Power Ushering, but they decided we're not going to put that in there.
Well, so contemplative prayer gets some space.
Yes, we wanted to make room. I don't know. They were more excited about your topic than mine. I can't understand it.
Go figure.
I can't see myself. So is that centered?
Yes, it is.
Is it too small? Because I have a bigger one.
It is too small.
How about this?
There you go.
Okay, the beautiful gospel.
Yes.
And we have 3 dear friends. Cherith Nordling, I think you know Cherith.
I do know Cherith.
And Brian Zhand and Brad Jersak, who is one of my dearest friends on the planet.
Oh.
And we're going to bring them together May 11 to 14. And we're inviting people from all over the world. We've already got a whole group coming from Australia, and I'm hoping South Africa, and we got people coming from Uganda, and we're hoping for some of our Europe family to come.
Wow.
But I also, again, in the theme of inclusiveness, I'm working really actively right now to reach out. Can I take that down now? Do you think?
Yes, yes. Thank you for that.
To reach out to leaders across the denominations, Protestant and Catholic. I want to just see Jesus' family come together. And this is not intended, as we map this out, we realize, whoa, the traditional way of doing conferences is, the speakers come and we want to make sure they get to say everything they want and we get lots of notes. No, they're going to do evening sessions, 3 nights, 3 different speakers. But then in the morning, they'll do a session, just one, and they'll share whatever's on their heart. And then the others will join in and we'll kind of round table around that and then break that out into the people's response and thoughts, but then also real time for going deep. And then in the afternoon, the workshops, and actually Friday afternoon, we're getting buses to take people to some of the great places to see in New Mexico. So I'm very excited. I'm excited because the Impact family, which is really worldwide now, and we've not been able to do a conference for several years because of COVID, but things are dropping rapidly. I'm sure we all know that. The COVID infections dropping. So we're looking forward to the family coming together, but I'm also looking forward to lots of new friends and people I don't even know yet, because I think we may come in not knowing each other, but we'll leave as family. So I'm just telling everybody, help me get the word out. Just help me get the word out, because I'm believing God's going to meet us in a very, very significant way. The gospel is so beautiful. And I think that when we really begin to understand the beautiful gospel again from here to here. And we get to see that how wonderful and embracing and non-transitional it is. It heals us at so many levels, and it empowers us to share that gospel. One of the greatest, not one of the greatest one-on-one evangelist I know is going to come to a workshop. He's coming all the way from Australia. He happens to be on our international board, but I can hardly wait because I know what this beautiful gospel, because he's one of the group of people that I kind of mentor. I know what's happened for him, and he's starting these, he's calling them community tables that are just exploding with people who don't know Jesus, and then they meet Jesus, then they meet each other, and then more groups start. So I know the beautiful gospel is incredibly powerful when it gets into us. So there you go. I know you're coming.
I am.
I hope you'll bring 27 of your best friends, and they'll bring 27 of their best friends.
Well, I already know some people from our community here are planning on coming. So, and many more are trying to configure their lives so they can be there. So
that's so great. That's so great. And, you know, I will allow people to wear their Bengals sweatshirts.
Okay. We will sport them proudly.
Is there anything else that you'd like us to cover before I sign off?
I really think that's it. So the conference is May 11th through 14th in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Yep. And the best place then for people to find out about the conference, find out more about you, find your book.
Probably go on to impactnations.com. Okay. And the conference is on the homepage, and you know, and you'll get to see what we're doing all over the world, because I can't even keep up with it. The other thing is, if people are interested, they can go impactnations.com/podcast. We have many podcasts going on. And so they can catch teaching, they can catch different guest speakers that we have. And on the website, they can really get a feel for just how powerful the kingdom of God is. Yeah. It's forcefully advancing.
Yes, yes. And they can sign up for, you have a newsletter too, right? Yes.
Oh, there's a newsletter. I forgot that. Yeah, there is. And they can also register for the conference. And I think, I'll give you a advance warning. I think that this week they told me that there's going to do a early registration, besides getting a discount, if you do it the rest of this month. So whatever we've got, a week or two, your name goes in the hat, and the winner gets $100 in books from our speakers.
Ooh.
So,
nice. So register soon.
Register soon, save some bucks, and get your name in the hat to get a bunch of cool books.
There you go. Well, Steve, thank you so much for being with us today. I'll put all that info in the show notes so people will have access to it. It's such a gift to be becoming friends and be joined in this journey together. Thanks to all of you for joining us for this time. I'd love to connect with you as well. You could find my book and some free stuff and some other things at susancarson.net. I'm on socials. I would love to connect with you and meet you there. So thanks again for joining us for this time. We bless you to live deeply rooted in love.